pleasure and to be here with you this afternoon. The title of our presentation this afternoon is CTE, the Ideal Lab to Accelerate English Language Acquisition. So our brain, based on brain research, our brain usually, whenever you're introduced to a brand new situation, is like first question to our brain is, where am I? Who are all these people? And what are we going to do today? So to answer those three questions for you, so here it is. This is my professional background. I started my teaching career back in 1987 at Isleta Independent School District in El Paso, Texas. My school sat less than 2 miles from the U.S.-Mexican border. So working with bilingual and English as a second language students is aside from me being a second language learner, it's been my focus of my career. I attended the University of Texas at El Paso and got a bachelor's and a master's degree out of Utah, and went on to pursue a PhD in curriculum and instruction out of New Mexico State University, which I earned back in 1997. Was employed by the Johns Hopkins University as a consultant and regional manager with 62 schools under my leadership. And from there, I linked to Edison Schools. Now it's known as Edison Learning. I'm sure that you have heard about this one company. They really profit out of schools that have been threatened or are being closed by states because due to poor performance. I have a set of twins which I want to introduce to you in a minute, but when they reached high school, I decided I needed to stay put, and so stopped traveling for a while and became a ELL professional development consultant for Education Service Center Region 19. Did that for 3.5 years, and I've been with the International Center for Leadership in Education for 5.5 years. So that's basically my credibility to you. This is my wonderful, lovely family. In there you see my set of twins, centerfold. To your right is my daughter, Ileana, and she works for Lockheed Martin in Fort Worth, Texas. And at the very back with sunglasses is my son, who's a federal agent. He's my oldest and has my only grandchild, Joaquin. And that name should be very familiar to you simply because our latest encounter with Mother Nature has been Hurricane Joaquin. And to your right-hand side, you see my 87-year-old mother who still drives her truck and dances and goes to her senior citizen center. And I am on your far left. So that's me. So here are the learning outcomes for this afternoon. We are looking at 4 learning outcomes. First of all is working based on the strengths of CTE, and we're going to be looking at making learning relevant and meaningful for English language learners by maximizing what's already in place, and that is CTE's hands-on approach. Number 2, learning outcome, we're going to be looking at validating students' affective, linguistic, and social needs in order to increase success in CTE programs, and through CTE help them accelerate language acquisition and therefore be more successful in classrooms during their content area instruction. Third goal for today is develop an in-depth understanding of research-based instructional practices and strategies to effectively support ELLs in CTE. And finally, we're going to focus on the importance of building background, collaborative conversations, and vocabulary development as the key drivers to maximize implementation of CTE. I'd like for you to begin by grabbing a piece of paper from close to you, and because this will be your running record of our discussions for today, so I'll give you a minute to find a piece of paper, blank piece of paper. And once you grab that piece of paper, if you can fold it in quadrants, so first you're going to fold it in half and then again in half. And you're going to title this paper, Capturing Today's Learning. So here are the main points that we will be covering this afternoon. And what I did is I assigned each of these 4 points to a particular quadrant. So as you are completing the titling of your paper, Capturing Today's Learning, if you can please label your 4 quadrants as well with the labels that I have here in front of you. So I'll give you a couple of minutes for you to do that. Okay, so in essence, one quadrant is making learning relevant and meaningful. The other one, affective, linguistic, and social needs. Instructional practices and strategies to effectively support ELLs and CTE. And building background, collaborative conversations, and vocabulary development. So as we go through the training this afternoon, I'd like for you to go ahead and I'm going to pause at certain points in the professional development and say, pull out your Capturing Today's Learning paper. Let's go ahead and capture any kind of learning that you just, any ahas, any learning that happened to you during this part of the presentation, and take a few minutes to capture it so that you can then later on go back to it and relate to it. So I'd like at this point in time is to have you think about a day in the life of a CTE student, okay? And we're going to do this by having you think about one of your CTE students, anyone, the first one that comes to your mind, okay? And as you're thinking about this student, I'd like for you to make a mind movie of a day in the life of that student in your classroom. So what does, when that student gets to your class, what is his day like? What do you see him doing? What do you listen, what is it that you're listening from him? So as you think about your student, if you can please write some responses in our response box. So I'll give you a couple of minutes more. Okay, so let me go ahead and move on. The purpose of having you think about a day in the life of your CTE student is because I wanted for you to begin to see all the things that are happening in your classrooms, which is really a great lab in order for students to produce language. So probably some of you saw your students involved in hands-on activities, definitely, because it is CTE. A lot of collaboration taking place among your students. A lot of building relationships, because it is, it is whenever we provide a student that opportunity to interact and to get to know each other, other people, that you begin to create those opportunities for building relationships. Did you see your students making progress visible? I think CTE is a wonderful, wonderful setup where you can actually measure progress of students. What about the social interaction and the communication that was taking place in your classroom, in that mind movie of yours? Teamwork. Did you see students involved in teamwork, acquiring work habits? How about, some students already taking on some leadership roles and definitely using their talents? So I just wanted to make a summary of what you can see already happening in a CTE classroom, and I want you to pat yourselves on the back because this is a great opportunity to go ahead and involve students and really take all of that involvement together to help them acquire English as a second language. Okay. So I'm going to move right along. What I'd like for us to come very clear with, and I'm sure that this is not anything new to you, but you know, CTE it offers an opportunity for students to be fully engaged in a learning environment, to be anxious to get to school and so on. So I'd like to take a few minutes for you to think about a traditional classroom without CTE, and think about your CTE classroom, and just kind of, if you're working with someone, maybe talk to your elbow partner and have some conversations about what are the major distinctions between CTE and the traditional classroom, okay? And the purpose of doing this is for you to celebrate all the great stuff that is taking place in your CTE classroom. So take a minute, please. Talk among yourselves. And definitely, you know, post some feedback up there for us. So, one of the purposes or the goals of this PD this afternoon is seeing or coming to a realization or an awareness that there's a lot of strengths in a CTE program, in a CTE classroom, and that all those strengths can help English language learners, because you have a number of them enrolled in CTE programs. And the idea is, how can we take this hands-on learning and help accelerate the acquisition of English? Okay? And one of the primary purposes of doing this is because we can equip our students with that ideal field that they want to enter in. But the reality is that a lot of the opportunities for them to advance in their field will be limited if they're not fluent English speakers. And so we're wanting to have CTE be the program that can really help accelerate acquisition of English for ELLs, but most importantly, so that all of your efforts and all of the learning that is taking place for the boys and the girls in CTE programs is so that whenever they finish, they're not only equipped with a career, but they are equipped to compete with others in the same career, so that they can move forward and advance to higher positions, higher levels, and become more knowledgeable about their particular field of interest. So that's the whole purpose of going through this presentation. So I have here, for ELLs, there's 3 basic needs. They have the need for language, so there's the linguistic needs. And then they also have the need to be part of that social environment, to be part of that real world reality out there. So students that are English language learners, they need to have that affective, that personal part of them, you know, for them to continue to grow personally, not only linguistically, but personally, so that they can build that confidence and that belief in themselves, that they can be successful, and that, you know, language is only a matter of time to acquire it, and then I'm going to go ahead and be ready to fly, as opposed to feeling oppressed or maybe feeling like, well, I'm seeing my language as a drawback instead of seeing it as you know, a strength. So that social, that affective component of a person needs to be nurtured for English language learners, in addition to having the academic component being met. So there's 3 pieces, basic needs, that English language learners need to you know, to fulfill in order to be successful. In addition to the academics, we need the language and we need the social, feeling a part of the process. So I'm going to go ahead and address each of the basic needs. I'm going to begin with the linguistic part of the basic needs. And whenever we're talking about the linguistic, I am addressing a term that is in the literature, and it's communicative competence. So what does that mean? So whenever I'm talking about language for ELLs, I don't necessarily mean grammar, but I'm talking about providing students with the opportunity to engage in discussions about real life situations, where the emphasis is not on grammar, but on the communication of ideas. Okay, so this is what we're pursuing as far as the linguistic basic need of ELLs. We're wanting for them to be able to communicate their ideas, because they have a lot of ideas. They're very intelligent. I'm sure that they can, offer a whole bunch of next steps to their particular field, and sometimes language can be a barrier for them. So it is the communication of ideas that we're wanting to provide opportunities for the boys and the girls. Okay? So how are we going to do this? How are we going to be able to have them gain that competence in communicating ideas? And that is going to be by putting in place what we refer to as collaborative conversations, which, by the way, aligns perfectly with New York Common Core standards. Okay? So what are collaborative conversations? Collaborative conversations is purposeful talk. Okay? In many classrooms, we see a lot of talk, but it's more social in nature. But when we're talking about collaborative conversations, we are really wanting to hear students thinking. And you can just imagine, for a student that does not have the level of English proficiency to be able to express freely about that particular field of interest, this can be a challenge. So those collaborative conversations must be very purposeful and must be definitely scaffolded and supported by teachers. And collaborative conversations have to do, these are conversations that are appropriate to the topic, to the text, to the field of interest of the student at the appropriate grade level. Collaborative conversations are also, also means working together and using the academic language to discover information, to discuss complex texts, and to build on each other's ideas. So this is the way we're going to go ahead and begin to put in place very purposeful talk in order to help students develop that language. Okay? Collaborative conversations tools that support the New York academic standards is whenever you want to have that purposeful talk, you want to have use of argumentations. And by that we mean students making claims with justifications, come back with counterclaims, using a lot of evidence from their reading, from their field of study to justify their thinking. We're also talking about, how collaborative conversations support New York academic standards is because students are able to think through their opinions and argumentations, which is now the new expectations. Kids are beginning to, be held accountable for making their thinking visible and for determining instructional next steps based on what students think and know. So just wanted to show you there the connection there so that everything that we do in the classroom is connected to what the expectation is of the boys and the girls. And I see some questions up there. I'll go ahead and get to those questions in a minute. So at this point in time, I'll go into those questions while you are reflecting. What I'd like for you to do is reflect on the opportunities that students in your CTE classrooms have for collaborative conversations. Okay? What are those opportunities that they currently have to engage in collaborative conversations? And remember, We're talking not social conversations, but we're talking very purposeful, collaborative conversations. So have a reflection, please. And if you can please submit some of your comments, I would appreciate it. Awesome. Are we needing a little bit more time? As you're reflecting, I'd like for you to think what the conversations, as you are going around monitoring students, what are the conversations that take place in the classroom? Awesome. Those comments are coming in. Jocelyn, you have a very, very good point there. It says students engage in collaborative conversations during CTE as much as the instructor will allow. Okay? And you are so right about that, because I've been to CTE classrooms where many times, I see like, come on, let them begin to discuss and so on. And sometimes the classrooms are more teacher driven in the instances that I've been into. So definitely what Justin brings up is those collaborative conversations will depend a lot on the instructor and the opportunities that the instructor provides for the boys and the girls, for the young men and women. Okay, so let me go ahead and continue here. So here, I have a few tips for you on scaffolding collaborative conversations among ELLs or for ELLs. Remember that depending on students' levels of English proficiency, students might sometimes need the support system of those sentence stems and those sentence starters. So don't be afraid of, providing them with those tools and slowly but surely scaffolding the process for them so that later on in the process, and as they feel comfortable more comfortable with the language, there might not be a need for sentence stems, but maybe just a starter. So another way of scaffolding collaborative conversations is providing a list of the frequently used vocabulary words in their field of study. That would certainly advance their understanding of vocabulary in that particular field. And just making sure, that they feel comfortable in verbalizing these words and putting thoughts together with these words. Also, partnering students with fluent English-speaking role models. So your partnerships need to be very strategic. You need to really think through how are you going to put students together, how are you going to partner them together, so that there's always fluent English role models that the students can learn from. Okay. Also, maybe giving them some statements that they can use to communicate to you whenever they're lacking comprehension. Like simple statements such as, I don't understand. That's a simple statement. Or I need help. Or can I check with a friend? So have a few statements that lend themselves to your field of study that students can know that even making them aware of the meaning of that particular statement so that whenever they're losing comprehension, they can immediately be asking for help. At the very top, I put talking chips, which is a wonderful, wonderful strategy that you can use with the boys and the girls to help them practice the language. And by this, I included also the steps to the talking chips. Talking chips is a great strategy, and you can do it with 5 pieces of paper, 5 little Post-its, or just anything that will represent a talking chip. Okay, And what you'll want to do is distribute an amount of talking chips per student in a group. So you might distribute 2 or 3 talking chips per student in the group. And what students do is they go ahead whenever they want to express their opinion or engage in the conversation, they put down a talking chip, and that means it's their turn to talk and everybody's turn to listen. And so aside from organizing your discussions in your groups, talking chips can also help you differentiate instruction for ELLs to where you're encouraging English language learners to pitch in to the conversation, and especially those students that stay behind and just kind of play a low-key role, you can say, I'm holding you responsible for 1 talking chip today. And then gradually, as students begin to feel more comfortable with the process, hold them accountable for 2 talking chips. So that means 2 times they're responsible for contributing to the conversation. This can also help you organize the level of conversation for those students that are more aggressive and wanting to take over the conversation. You can also limit the amount of conversation so that you can open the floor for others to begin to contribute as well. So you'll have the steps there. I invite you to practice this in your next session. So here it is. I'd like for you to pull out your capturing today's learning. I've been speaking, I think, for the last 20-25 minutes, and I'd like for you to capture any of the learning that has taken place so far. Give you a couple of minutes for that. I'm going to go ahead and move on. The next piece of the basic needs, remember I started with 3 basic needs of ELLs. The second part is the social and the affective part of the needs of English language learners. And for this particular presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about building relationships and academic background, and building academic background. That's what I'm going to focus on for the social and affective part of the needs of ELLs. We can focus on many other things, but these are critical to the success of the academic success of English language learners. Why relationships matter, okay? And this particular slide comes out of the International Center for Leadership in Education. Our philosophy is, before you can get to rigor, before you can get to the real world application, you need to build the relationships with your students. So building relationships with students increase feelings of safety, of motivation, and risk-taking, okay? When you have those relationships, not only you and the students, but students and other students, students among students, it just enables English language learners to feel okay about taking risks, about beginning to produce the language, which might not be, at the level of proficiency that we want them. But if we have that set up and we are making everybody else aware of our ELL's affective, needs, then everybody should be able to motivate everybody in your classroom. So that's very important that you look at the dynamics among your students, because we want those relationships to enhance the learning, okay? And relationships also need to be in place in order to build a safety environment to challenge students into higher order level of thinking. Here are some ways that you can begin to establish great relationships among your boys and your girls. Before I share you my suggestions, how about if you think about some of the things that are already taking place in your classroom, okay, that promote great relationships. So I have 3 questions here to invite you to think about this and see where we are in terms of building great relationships in our classroom. It's like, how much do you know about students' personal lives and previous academic experiences? And by personal lives, I mean, do you know if they go out and work right after school? And do they work in their field of study? Or have they had enough sleep to be able to be wide-eyed and bushy-tailed the following day in school? So how much do you know of your students in order to be able to make information more relevant to them, and in order to, it's not knowing about a person that helps us build the relationship with that person. Do you know your students' levels of English proficiency? Is it a requirement that you know of? This is one of the things that I find that is lacking across the country. Yeah, like whenever I visit classrooms, I'm wanting to know who are your ELLs, so I kind of like, pull the teacher a little bit to the side and I said very discreetly, can you point to me to your one or two or your English language learners? And sometimes they don't even know. I've asked building principals just recently, like last week, I was, talking with a couple of principals and I said, how many ELLs do you have? And they didn't know right off the top of their head. So that tells me a lot about what goes on at a campus as far as meeting the needs of English language learners. And I'm generalizing, but for the most part, those have been my findings. Also, how are we cultivating relationships with the students? So think about this. And as we move through the presentation and as we wrap up, I want you to take this as a piece of homework for you and begin to reflect on these 3 questions. And if they're clearly in place for you and your classroom and your students, give yourselves a big pat in the back. And if not, this will be your homework. Got it? Okay, so here are some engagement characteristics that you want to promote in your classroom. Lots of positive body language, consistent focus, verbal participation, and we talked about the talking chips as a possibility. You want to instill in those students a sense of confidence. You want your CTE classrooms to be fun and excitement. And also teach them to seek help and getting individual attention. I'm going to tell you this is key in order to be successful in America. Okay? Because normally what I see is people that are very successful in our country are those people that are always, hey, you know what, I don't know this, but I know somebody that knows this, so I'm going to pick up the phone and call. So it's a matter of saying, let me look for someone that has been through this so that I can learn from that other person, make my job more effective and easier. So you would want to encourage the boys and the girls to begin to seek help. Anytime that you don't know something, you ask. Also, engagement characteristics you want to promote is students that can clearly describe their learning, that they find their work meaningful, relevant, and connected, rigorous, that they're able to work with complex problems and issues and be able to explain, look at this one, be able to explain what high quality work looks like and how their work compares to the work of others, okay? And very important, can set and meet personal goals. So those were some engagement characteristics. So what do you think about this? CTE provides classroom environments that promote English language acquisition. True or false? Of course, that's going to be so true. Okay? So, some tips. Be strategic how you create your teams or partnerships in order to establish positive relationships in your class. Always give reasons for purposeful conversation, and continuously monitor and check for understanding. Monitor and check for understanding, because that will determine the adequate progress of your students. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of building academic background and how CTE supports integration of background knowledge. As you well know, now we hear a lot about students being career ready. Well, career ready means a step higher than college ready, because they don't only need the core academic skills, but we are trying to teach them employability skills as well as technical and job-specific skills, okay, which are the skills that they need for 21st century. Lots of ways of thinking, lots of ways of working, knowing the tools for working, and equip them with skills for living in the world and putting concepts into practice. I just want to again bring in the standards because I don't want us to think that this is in addition to, but right now, college and career readiness, anchor standards, English language development standards, they focus on the very same thing, which is listening, speaking, reading, writing, and language. So by supporting ELLs, we would definitely be supporting the expectations that the state has set for us. A great tool that this is an old tool, the old KWL, and CTE is a lot of expository text that students encounter. They're the real world manuals, that they need to understand. So always use your KWLs to find out how much do students know about the particular content that you're trying to deliver to them. What is it that they would like to know? And always come back and say, well, did you learn it? So your KWLs are important tools, okay? Again, I talked about CTE being a lot of expository, a lot of opportunities for explanation, description, and organization around one topic. One very important thing, please, that's the fourth bullet. Teacher cannot assume that students have background knowledge of the topic that you're trying to deliver. So utilize your graphic organizers, your thinking maps, any way that you can make thinking visible for the boys and the girls, for your students would be great because it'll help them sort information in their brain. So I'm going to take a minute for you to capture any of today's learning. Pull out your capturing today's learning piece of paper, which by the way is a wonderful strategy to take back into your classroom as well. The titles of the quadrants can change, but a piece of paper can help them keep a running record of what they're learning. I want to move on to the third piece, and that is the academic portion of meeting the needs of ELLs. And for this one, I'm going to specifically focus on vocabulary development. So how is vocabulary related to background knowledge? Okay, so I have a saying here from Robert Marzano, and I'm sure that you're familiar with Robert Marzano. And he says, when I read this saying, this quote from Robert Marzano, it just struck me. And I wanted to share it with you. And it says, vocabulary is really just a name for the terms that we have that are labels on our experiences. In other words, our experiences provide for us those labels, that vocabulary. And fundamentally, that's what vocabulary is. So if you don't have vocabulary for a content area, you don't know the content area. Okay? And knowing the content area is what opens the door for us, so we can actually build background knowledge by directly teaching certain vocabulary in a certain way. So it's very important that vocabulary plays a very critical role in your classrooms. And that's it goes back to my suggestion. Provide that list of key vocabulary that is essential for, to students' field of study. Always remember that not all terms are equal. Some terms are interesting but not useful. So we're after those terms that are useful for the boys and the girls. Some are useful but not critical. And some are critically important. So we're after those vocabulary terms that are critically important. I'm sure that you're familiar with the work done by Isabel Beck, and she goes on to categorize vocabulary in the 3 tiers. And tier 1, normally they're referred to as everyday speech, everyday words. And tier 1, based on the work that Isabel Beck has done, she says, they're rarely required. But I caution you that you need to focus on tier 1 words as well, because a lot of our English language learners do not come with simple terms that we think they're everyday words. They're not everyday words for them. So just a word of caution there. And as you know, the tier 2 words are general academic words. And these are words that they can take from one subject area to another, such as infer, evaluate, and I can apply it across the content areas. And then you have the tier 3 words that are very specific to their field of study. So just keep in mind as you are working with vocabulary terminology, what kind of, you're wanting to make sure that students are understanding Tier 1 words and that you are providing them with those Tier 2 words that are portable words they can take to other content areas, and then definitely that they acquire the vocabulary terms for their field of study. So how can we promote vocabulary development in CTE classrooms? And I have some ideas here for you. You might probably already be using them. So you provide vocabulary lists specific to the field of study previously mentioned. How about those word walls? And remembering that word walls are not a place for words to die, go and die, but that those are words that are currently being used, and you're going back to those words, and the students are going back to those word walls, okay? Encourage them to create their own vocabulary notebooks. How about playing games with words, categorizing words, utilizing cognates? For those of you that don't know what cognates words are, cognates are words that stem from Latin and Greek descent words, and they're they're almost like they're very similar in language, in the two languages, in English and Spanish, or if the language of the student other than English comes from a Latin and Greek descent, then you're going to have some commonalities in words, such as placid and plácido, such as general and general, and then there's a mixed cognates, but I won't go into that. But check into this. There's a lot of resources available online on cognates. Also, how about highlighting root words and affixes? Maybe in their field of study, the same root word is being used over and over, and that will facilitate the pronunciation of words, and then students will see how the language changes by adding a prefix or a suffix to the word. So I'd like for you to pull out your capturing today's learning one more time. Record any ahas or any one slide that you'd like to go back and visit. And with that, I'd like to open up for questions and answers. And we have about 5 minutes for Q&A or suggestions. Any questions out there? One of them is for Michelle. What could you use at a craft store in order to represent fans in a park or lighting in a park? You mean from a craft store? I'm thinking like popsicle sticks right away. I don't know if that's the kind of answer that you're referring to. Let me see this other question. What if there are several languages? Got it. Pamela, this is a great question. Remember that for CTE, normally you will find English as a second language instruction in secondary settings. And by this I mean you're not focusing on the native language. So it's not a bilingual education setup, but it's more as English as a second language setup. So in that case, Pamela, whenever you have different languages being represented, you use English as the language that it will be a general or the commonality or the language of instruction. And then you use ESL methodologies such as pictures and objects, body language to make your message understood by students. Should word walls be separated in tier levels? You know what? Should they be? Not necessarily. Can they be? Definitely. I would highly recommend that anything that you can do for your boys and your girls to help them you know, gain vocabulary to accelerate their acquisition of vocabulary? Definitely. So I would say, you know, I would actually break it down for them and say, you know, boys and girls, this word infer, you can take it, you can apply it anywhere. And so definitely that would help. I'm looking into the next one. Can we see one of the beginning slides? It listed hands-on activities and collaboration. So let me go ahead and just kind of yeah, let me go ahead and see, trying to meet your need here before the time it's over. And let me go back to the beginning slides. And maybe we can have it up there for collaboration. I don't know if, let me see, I had two. Okay, this is one of the slides that I had with some recommendations. And then I had this other slide. I'm thinking that this is the one that you're wanting right here. Remember that the presentation is being recorded and you can always come back to the slides on the presentation. Hopefully that'll help. Let me see, Michelle, hopefully that'll help. If you initially know little about the native language culture of the students, how would you build bridges between yourself and the students? You know, Justin, this is a great question. And I can tell you, I remember when I first went to work, and I'm talking many years back, with a group of teachers that were working with Navajo children. And you know, most of the morning they kept on sharing with me how little they knew about their students and so on. So what I did during lunch break, they have what they call trading stores, and I just, you know, I went to grab lunch, and in the trading stores, it's like a grocery store, and I see like a section of library books, and voila, wouldn't you know that I found like 3 books in there, but the Navajo. I found out about the Navajo Long Walk. I found out about the quinela, yeah, which is the equivalent of a quinceañera. And I bought them, and I brought them into the classroom, and I said, did you know about this? Did you know about this? So many times, Justin, is just being aware. Now, you know, there's a lot of books out there. I'm thinking about, you know, Hawaii, that they have a lot of the Japanese population. There's a lot of literature out there that can help you understand. If nothing else, you know, kind of read those simple books that are available to children, just so that you can begin to understand a little bit more about the culture. And why not, you know, researching the kind of music that culture plays or is into. Now with the internet, it is so easy to really Google any kind of background on any particular language or culture. So I welcome you to check that out. Okay. Let me see. Let me go up there because we're running out of time. Let me see if there's other questions that I could have addressed, because I know that they began to come in pretty quickly. Students engage in collaborative conversations. Yeah, okay. So I think I have acknowledged most of the questions. I'm going to go ahead and close this so that I can bring closure to the presentation. And we were actually just a slide away from closing the presentation. Okay, so as I wrap up, I'd like for you to, after this session, begin to think about something that you noticed about this presentation, something that you enjoyed about it, something that you wonder, and something that you still need. And then on the last slide, there's my contact information at godinasilva@yahoo.com. Please feel free to drop your questions. I'll be happy to share any of the links, any of the information, any of the knowledge that I have in my 28 years of as an educator. And this pretty much wraps up my session.
Thank you, Norma. On behalf of the CTE Technical Assistance Center, we'd like to thank Norma today for her presentation, and thank you to all the attendees for joining us. As a reminder, this recorded presentation, as well as the PowerPoint slides, will be posted on nyctecenter.org within 72 hours.